Hi, folks. Welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. We are waiting for rain around here. We were supposed to get it earlier, and we haven't yet. It looks like it's going to rain. It feels like it's going to rain. It just hasn't yet done it. So we'll see if we get that today. In matters of news, obviously, most of the news is still very focused on the whole Epstein thing, but there are other things going on. It was a church shooting in Kentucky today. Tragic event there. It looks like a couple of people perished. Also, apparently tomorrow, the White House has announced that the president will give some kind of announcement in regards to Russia. And also, the NATO General Secretary is on his way to the White House to meet with the president and potentially be there when that announcement is made. Now, word on the street is that the president's going to announce that we as America will be now selling weapons to NATO, and then NATO will be transferring those weapons to Ukraine. This is a little different than what's happened before, where we're just either giving or selling the weapons directly to Ukraine. Apparently, and again, this is what the rumor mill is saying, that NATO has agreed to be buying these weapons so that they can transfer them to Ukraine. I guess in one way, we're no longer giving stuff away, if that's the case. But it's certainly feeding the military-industrial complex. It's feeding the war machine, which is not what we were told was going to happen with this whole Ukraine-Russia thing. Russia seems to be very serious about this. And while the experts say that Russia has lost a lot of troops due to this war, it doesn't really seem to have affected them economically. In fact, their GDP has gone up. Things look pretty strong when it comes to their economy. In fact, their currency has risen against the dollar quite a bit lately. So they don't look like they're hurting too bad. Remember what I said from the very beginning of this. Before this even happened, before Russia moved into Ukraine, I was telling you that this was going to happen. And then I said this is going to be a very long war. Why? Because anytime Russia gets into a war, it's always a long war. This is part of Russian strategy. They are totally okay with using up a good percentage of their military-aged population. They've done this for centuries. They always go in and they kind of bleed the enemy dry. Sometimes it works for them, sometimes it doesn't, but they are very okay with very long, drawn-out wars. It's just a Russian thing. So that could certainly get worse. We'll see. We'll see what's going to go on with that one. Depending on the deal, will it take away from American weapons? I don't know. I mean, if we're just allowing them to buy from these weapons manufacturers, as long as they're still able to make weapons for us, I don't know. No one knows the deal yet. We don't even know what's going to be said tomorrow. I'm just merely speaking on the speculation of it, so we'll wait and see. Not recently, but all the time. I tell you all the time to be stocking up, to be getting yourselves prepared, to be getting your houses in order. I tell you that on a daily basis. And I think that for those of you that don't agree with me on a lot of things, that's probably something you would still agree with me on, that we need to be doing that, whether it be for flash floods, like what's happened in numerous places across the country, or World War III that looks like it's looming around the next corner, or a stock market crash or a dollar collapse, or, all kinds of stuff. There's always something happening that's worthy of us getting prepared, because that's a natural way to be. It's only under modern times where we have all these conveniences and that everything's instant that people aren't prepared. Myself, I grew up in a world where it was normal to have at least several weeks of food in a freezer packed full and a bunch of canned goods in the cellar or the pantry, where you've, raised your own food and you've, canned tomatoes and green beans and other things. That's normal. We've got to get back to that. The problem is, especially now, a lot of people are hurting already. they're already struggling and probably wondering, how in the world am I expected to prepare when, I'm already on a shoestring budget? And I completely understand them with that. I mean, we are certainly not wealthy. We're not like maybe some in the prepping YouTube world that seems to have basically what they want when they want to prepare. We're not in that boat. And so I understand that. I understand there's people out there that are hurting a lot worse than us. And so it's different. That's part of how this system has created so many people and caused so many people to just be struggling. And I am not in the boat that, well, if you're poor or you're old or you're disabled, you're just going to die. Because history has shown that that's not always the case, that it's not wealth always that causes you to survive. It's not stuff that's always what causes you to survive. It's not always necessarily your youth and your strength. Typically, historically speaking, whether it's a collapse or just a real survival situation where you're out lost in the woods or whatever, typically what is the big deciding factor of whether or not you will survive is what goes on up here. It's that mental strength. And so above all, with the exception of spiritual, so setting that aside, your mental strength, your psychological preparedness, that's something that everyone can do. And so that's something that you need to strongly work on and realize that no matter what you face, you can survive if you have a strong enough mindset. Now, putting that aside, what else do you do? Well, you do the best you can. And I know that's very oversimplifying and generalizing it, but it is true. You may not be able to go out and drop a few $1,000s on emergency freeze-dried food, but can you purchase an extra can or two of vegetables every time you go to the grocery store? Can you go through your home and just try to figure out what you have that could help you survive? Say a bug out bag or some type of survival bag. Can you put that together with mostly things that you already have? Most people can. Most of the things that you would put into an emergency bag, you'd find right at your house. And so do that. It doesn't have to be some high-speed tactical backpack filled with all expensive, top-of-the-line gear. Just stuff that's going to help you when times get rough is a good idea to have. And then be prepared to possibly move quickly if you have to. Think of these disasters that's happened in Texas and North Carolina and New Mexico and a few other places where the flooding has come in. You may have to move quickly. And so you want to have a bag, an emergency bag, with stuff ready so that you can move. You also want to have a little bit of money in there if you can, a little bit of cash, maybe some copies of, emergency type documents, birth certificates and copies of bank records and things like that would be a good idea to have also. And then if you're able to, maybe have a stash of stuff outside of your house, whether it be in the back of your vehicle, somewhere on your property, preferably higher ground, or maybe at a trusted friend or family's. That's not a bad idea either. The thing is yes, preparedness, you can spend a lot of money on it. You can spend an insane amount of money, but you can also spend very, very little money and still be quite prepared. Focus on skills. Maybe once upon a time you had some skills like sewing, quilting, blacksmithing, canning food, and maybe you just haven't done it in a while. Be a good idea to kind of brush up on those things because those may come in handy. Medical skills, just learning basic first aid and CPR. It's good to take an actual hands-on course, but if you're not able to, there's certainly a lot of decent, good videos out there on YouTube that you can watch, and you can learn some pretty basic skills. Same thing with plant medicine, herbs, edible things. It's better to do it hands-on trained, but if you can't do that, then watch some good videos because there's plenty of them out there. The bottom line is it's all about, well, it's all about how you think. And yes, you know, you can spend a lot of money, but if you're not mentally prepared, you're not prepared at all, folks. In fact, you can have a lot of good stuff, but if you're not mentally ready for a disaster, you can fall apart and become a victim to it just like anyone else. So don't get so downtrodden just because you say, well, I'm poor, or I'm old, or, you know, I don't have a farm, or anything like that. Yeah, those things are nice, to be able to be young and wealthy and live out in the woods, but you can still survive. You can still make connections with people. You can still come up with a plan and put together a decent amount of emergency gear with what many times is just found around you. And if you're looking for things you don't have, look at, you know, thrift stores, yard sales, secondhand stores. Sometimes you can find a few things there too. So for those of you out there, you know, commenting and talking to me and saying, hey, we're already poor, you know, how are we going to make it? Because I don't have the money to go out and buy, you know, a $2,000 solar generator and, you know, hundreds of dollars of this and hundreds of dollars of that. I get it. But don't give up just because there's not money there. If you have your wits about you, that's the most important and most valuable thing that you can have when it comes to preparedness. So be thinking about that kind of stuff and try to put together your own emergency kit with what you have in your home, and then do your best to try to put back food, and then come up with a plan of, you know, what do you do when you have to be hunkered down in your home, and then also what do you do when you have to leave, because depending on the scenario, that may be what you have to do. Folks, the bottom line is don't give up just because you don't have a big pocketbook. There'll be a lot of probably dead and desperate people when things fall apart that have a lot of money. So don't just be focused on that. Get your houses in order and prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next video.